Bad Life from Public Image Limited on Revenge of the 80s Radio. On drums and producing the album was Martin Atkins. He has played the skins for several bands, including Ministry, Killing Joke, and his own creations, Brian Brain and Pigface. He's also written his third book about the music business. Welcome to the music business. Your Atkins is here with me now. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Hey, greetings from Chicago.
You've been in the punk music scene since the 70s, a pioneer of industrial music later on, and have built a reputation not only as a top drummer, but a music business mentor. While we get into all of the latter soon, let's start with what brought you into the music business.
My dad bought me a drum kit when I was 9. If he'd bought me a lawnmower, this would be a landscape gardening conversation. I don't know why he bought me a drum kit, but he did, and I started to beat the hell out of it. I just started playing in cover bands in the north of England and in the working men's clubs, and I was playing 7 nights a week. So, by the time I was 15 or 16, I'd been playing for 6-7 years. I was pretty good, and but bored with the north of England, and this punk thing started happening, and I just had to get down to London and try and be a part of it.
So how did you get into the scene?
Well, I went down to London. I was living in Durham, like almost Newcastle, and I went down to London for some auditions. My dad got me a ride on a moving truck. It was just a mess, really. And I ran out of money. Just slept with some people I met at the pub in their house, and the day I was leaving, I had a ride to get back and no money at all. I was reading Melody Maker, and there was an ad in the back of Melody Maker. It just said, drummer required for a band with rather well-known singer. And I knew that was the beginning of Public Image Limited. And I called the number, and it was Virgin Records. And they're like, yeah, auditions are tomorrow. I'm like, well, I have to leave today. Can I audition this afternoon? They're just like, no, you can't. The auditions are tomorrow. And I'm like, well, I can't do it. I've got to go home, which sounds really lame, doesn't it? And every mile from London back to Durham, I knew I'd made the wrong decision. I should have found some way to stay there and do it. So basically, when I got back to Durham, I told the guys I was in the cover band with, I'm like, hey, screw this, I'm moving to London. And after about a day, they came back to me and said, you know what, we're going to move to London too. Screw the northeast of England. And we all moved down together. And it took about 2 years, maybe, I think, for PIL to go through, oh my goodness, maybe 6 drummers. And I just kept calling the label. I got Jeanette Lee's phone number, who was the publicist at the time. Anytime there was an opening, I just tried to get in there, and I ended up just, playing on that last track on the Metal Box.
I'm sure you got in on the right day that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the lessons you'll learn when you start out, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Martin Atkins is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Chris Cordani here. So you're with the band. You're pretty much the 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever drummer of the group. And how did that work?
Well, it's kind of weird. For a kid from the north of England, just to be on stage with John it's very easy to kind of put today's lens on it. If you say, well, John just came out and in support of Donald Trump, which is just ridiculous. But, back then, the hairs would stand up on the back of my neck when we would play Public Image, It was an amazing time to be in that band, I think it was just really cool. I've always remained just a huge fan of PIL, but it was great to do that. We toured America. We did American Bandstand with Dick Clark, which is a legendary TV show. And then at the end of the American tour, Keith fired me. I think the first of 2 or 3 times that Keith would fire me. Then I went doing my own stuff for a while with Brian Brain, and then they asked me to help them with the Flowers of Romance album because nothing was really happening with it. So I made some, I think I co-wrote 4 or 5 of the songs on the Flowers album, and then they moved to New York.
It seemed like Public Image Limited went through drummers like George Steinbrenner and went through managers in his Yankee days.
Yeah, I mean, it was me for 5 years, but I was in and out for 5 years. It's kind of strange, really.
Let's go to Brian Brain. Martin Atkins is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. That was your project. The name, was it merely a play on words, or was it actually named after that cricket player?
Oh, I didn't know there was a cricket player.
Well, then I got the answer.
What kind of a sad bastard would I be? Who names a band after a cricket player? Oh, my goodness. I have no idea how that name came about. I think it's the only band name that's an anagram of itself, or at least it was until a few years ago. So I started Brian Brain with my producer friend John Madden before I joined Pill. I was writing lyrics, and he was in the studio working with Cliff Richards on a bunch of stuff. He was like the intern. And when Cliff Richards would leave the studio at night, we'd sneak in with a bunch of beer and use all the instruments in the studio till 6 a.m. So I had this thing, and then Pete Jones came in and played bass, Bobby Sergino on guitar, and that was Brian Brain for a while. After I moved to America, Margot Oliveria from the Go-Go's joined on bass, and Jeff Smythe joined on guitar, and then we kind of went from a 3-piece to a 12-piece with a horn section. It was kind of nuts.
Let's get into the music of Brian Brain. It was a unique mix of 70s style punk and its lyrical style and bass and vocals, but added borderline experimental synth sounds and guitar riffs with more pop sensibilities. What was the concept of the band in your mind when you started it?
Oh, there wasn't a concept. I think that one of the great things about the name of the band being Brian Brain is somebody will come up to you and say, "Hey, Martin, where's Brian?" I'm like, "Oh, he's in the dressing room and he wants a beer too." I mean, it wasn't a concept. I had bags of prescription speed, and I mean, we were just mental. And in that, I mean, this is post-punk, really, 78. And we're just experimenting in the studio with layered drum kits, and as you said, the synthesizer. And I think our live show was 26 minutes long. We toured the States and had a blast. I think it was, we were throwing out inflatable rabbits and throwing things at the audience. We threw bananas at the audience. And it didn't seem like, okay, what's the experiment going to be today? It was just crazy. I think at the Moonlight Club in London, we taped an audience together. That's just ridiculous. So we had a broom pole and a bunch of rolls of tape. And at first, I think people thought that me and Pete Jones were dancing around the crowd like crazy Morris dancers. And then as we started to wrap tape around their legs
oh, man.
and push people over, it became obvious what we were doing. I mean, it was glorious experimentation, really. It really was.
Later, you go back to Public Image Limited. You mentioned that, and you, again, back to Brian Brain. So back and forth, you work with a lot of other artists, but you also went into management. You produced albums. You started running things with the bands. When you came back to Public Image Limited, though, the album you co-produced, This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get, was a bit different from most of old PIL fare. What did you want to bring from your past experiences into that album?
Well, when we made that album, I'd just done some Brian Brain. I hadn't started working with Killing Joke or anybody else at that point. And there's some gloss to that album. This is not a love song. Probably my least favorite song that did the best out of any Pill song all over the world, I think. We added a horn section, which, I think John and I both like dub, and we liked horns, and we liked experimenting in the studio. But there's some stuff on that album, Tie Me to the Length of That, The Pardon, Blue Water came out of those same sessions, odd time signatures and improvisational stuff that's really cool. But I think that the gloss on that album combined with the band that we hired to go out live with us created not a great situation for that album. I call that band the Holiday Inn Band.
Interesting. As we said before, you went back into Brian Brain, worked with a lot of other artists after that. Somewhere, though, in your trails, you found a budding genre on its ground floor, industrial music.
Well, so I'd moved to New York with, back in PIL, and started to, we were touring a lot, visiting lots of different cities, and I think it was during my time with Killing Joke, so this will be 88, 89, and I'm managing Killing Joke, because if I hadn't been managing Killing Joke, they wouldn't have existed for me to play in them. It was a bit of a mess when I joined them. And I think the guys in Killing Joke knew Al Jorgensen from Ministry, so we ended up in Chicago, back in Al's apartment, a big loft-style apartment with a bar in it. And I kind of got interested in what was going on. And the music just seemed really exciting to me. It was like 1976 again, And so right at this time, I've been with Killing Joke for a while, and the guys in Blondie asked me to join Blondie. And then I get a phone call from Al Jorgensen asking me to go out and tour with Ministry. And he was obviously a big PIL Killing Joke fan. And so in the middle of, still being in Killing Joke, I went out on the road for 2 months with Ministry. And that was really the beginning. I know industrial, the industrial purists, there's all kinds of other albums before that, Dreams Less Sweet, Psychic TV. There's all kinds of interesting stuff going on. But this was where it started to explode across the States. We're incorporating electronics into the live show, trigger pedals to trigger sounds from the bass drum, which is revolutionary. I mean, we were hot glue gunning parts of the electronics back into place during the show. It was that experimental. And of course, we experimented with the visuals, and Al's team had all these different videos for each song as well. And I find myself in Chicago in the middle of all of that. I started Pigface the day the Ministry tour ended in 1991. And I've kept, with a few breaks, some longer than others, I've kept Pigface going for the last 25, 26 years.
Well, you founded Pigface with William Rieflin.
We were both on that Ministry tour, yeah.
Right, from Ministry. So you go from a 2-drummer tour to a 2-drummer band.
Right, and when we played last November, I think we had 9 drummers on stage.
That's a lot of drummers, but...
It's too... I am a drummer. I'm going to put my hand in the air and say that is too many drummers.
Yeah, but you think everybody wants the spotlight. There'd be a lot of drum solos to be spread around, I suppose.
Well, it was. I think the last 15 minutes of the show was one big cacophony, but a good one, a really good tribal ending,
Martin Atkins is with me here on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Let's get into his new book. Welcome to the music business. Well, straight ahead, right here on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Jive Jive from Brian Brain, a group founded by my guest Martin Atkins, drummer, producer, band manager, music business innovator, and lecturer. His newest book, Welcome to the Music Business, is out now. Martin, this is your 3rd book. The first 2 have been go-to tomes for budding musicians, band managers, and industry veterans alike. What inspired you to write both those and the new one?
Kind of happy accidents, really. I went to Columbia College Chicago to get some interns to help with my label and a big tour that we had coming up. And I did a presentation for them on all of the promotional CDs, the postcards, the street team people we had on this tour to justify them giving me some interns. And they said to me, when can you start? And I said, I can take interns back to my office with me now. And they said, no, when could you start teaching this stuff? Because this is great. and which just felt ridiculous to me, but I did it. And there wasn't a textbook for touring back then, so I started to write one. I'd begun writing my kind of memoirs, but I put that aside and started to write Tour Smart, which is a touring textbook, really. And it just kind of took off from there. I like giving bands advice. I like experimenting. I've always been curious. Why is this sound system crap? Why is there a huge crowd here tonight and there wasn't very many people last night? Does the ticket price get involved? I've just always been interested in all of this stuff, not just the in the studio behind the kit stuff. So it started to make perfect sense.
Many young musicians become discouraged when they get cheated out of pay for the first time or lose out in a few auditions or get a raw deal with their first contract. How did you stay? Well, you talked about this a little earlier with the whole not being able to show up at that one day thing, but how did you stay encouraged through the early stumbles?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I just keep going. I think creative people in the music business, especially is not correct. I mean, I'm sure other genres have had their ups and downs too, but if you came up through punk, we were always just looking at there's no money, but how could we do this anyway? And your brain starts to get used to looking at the 25 ways to do something and then not getting discouraged, powering through, doing the opposite, inverting that, and that isn't what you go with, but it inspires somebody else to come up with the idea that does work. And once you get into that problem-solving, creative mindset, you become more unstoppable. It's tough. The music business is tough. Life is tough. Touring is crazy tough. And, I think that the thing that nobody told me was that this would be a lifelong thing. When I joined PIL, I thought to myself, I might have a couple of good years at this game, worse than a professional soccer player. But it turns out, as long as you're not an idiot, you can do this for a lifetime. I think the benefit of that for me is that on the one hand, you could say, I know lots of stuff about touring or the music business or entrepreneurship. On the other hand, I'm kind of old. I've been there and I've probably done it.
In Welcome to the Music Business, you give real hard-hitting, non-polished advice to musicians and others looking to make it in the industry. The complex concepts are conveyed with advice like, you might be the one screwing yourself or think of your parents before getting shagged, but you offer a lot of real keys to artists too, things that unlock their potential to get to the next level. You give them the idea that while they entered more naively than they might have thought, the book would navigate them through the volatile waters of the music business, giving pointers with those with big dreams that have never thought of things like the most common reason bands break up.
Right. One of the reasons Welcome to the Music Business exists is that it makes all of those concepts that are in some other books, including mine, just easy. Play the smallest venue. It's crazily simple advice. And I think there's a picture of this guitar hero jammed in a phone booth. And my reasoning is, look, if you don't know you can fill a venue that holds 200 people, play a venue that holds 100 people. And if you don't know if you can fill that, play in a phone booth. At least you can call your agent the next day or your parents or a radio station and say, the show last night, it was packed. It was wall to wall. You could not move in there, except for, and that would be a great analogy, except that phone booths don't really exist anymore. But it's just shining a different light on, ambition, and the way to get to where you're going is not to try and get there tomorrow. It's to plan on 5 to 6 years of working really hard until you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I saw U2 play to 17 people at the Rock Garden in London. So there's obviously a path from there to wherever giant stadium they're playing later this year. But it's not magic. It's just hard work. And if you ask Bono, how did you become huge? He will probably say, oh, it was magic, it's a dream come true, because he's a storyteller and a myth maker. But the reality is, it's just 7 years of slog and tears and diarrhea and, flat tires and being ripped off by a venue and going back and getting into fights and healing the wounds and losing your cat and all of that stuff.
Well, that's the big one. You don't just tell these young people or anybody reading, it's going to be great. As long as you work hard, as long as you improve as far as music's concerned, nothing's going to happen on the road because you're going to be really awesome when you're out there, as long as you tell yourself you can do it and you play the music right. No, you tell them, look, if you don't watch out, your gear is going to get stolen. If you play to a room too big, that doesn't make any sense to you, rather than dance around it.
Right, but it's just really Sun Tzu, never take your country to war unless you're sure of the outcome. It's not rocket science.
The big one, though, and this is something that indicates one of the hugest changes in the music business over the last 4 years. It's in your book. You say it in plain English. Labels are no longer necessary.
Labels haven't been necessary since 1977. I don't know when Stiff Records started, or Beggar's Banquet, but I mean, that was just a punk thing. And now I think, the only way for you to get the deal that you think you want with a label is to not need the deal. Because if you need the deal, you're going to get screwed. If you don't need the deal, you can actually negotiate. But if you don't need the deal, why would you do the deal? Bring in 2 extra people to run your business for you, and keep the flexibility and keep the vibe. I think there's a point where an established label can help an established band, but a label doesn't help establish a band.
And do it yourself is a great thing.
Oh my goodness, it's the only way.
Your book, while it's for the music business, it can be translated to other occupations as well. I've seen a lot of the similarities with radio, but even the regular boardroom, moving up on Wall Street. Basic business networking concepts are just as relevant in the music world as they are in other arts, on Main Street, on Wall Street. The concepts. Be on time for meetings or practice. Learn some business sense. Be clean. Hygiene matters.
Yeah, don't be a...
Right, don't be a jerk. Make sure everything's mutually beneficial. These are simple concepts that artists may not be ready for sometimes, or may not understand when they come in, because they say, I have my music, I can do whatever I want, I'm the talent.
Right, but I think that goes back to what I was saying before. Like, nobody told me I'd be doing this for 45 years, right? and I think there's a smash and grab mentality about when you get into the music business. You're at a big show, it's like, whoa, grab a case of beer, steal a microphone, and it's like, so many times I've booked a band to do something here or there. And I'm like, hold on a minute. 5 years ago, that singer was in another band and he stole a $100 microphone. People remember everything, and I think if you were to understand that, if I was to understand in 1980 that the people I was meeting then would become friends for life. If you understand that you're always going to talk to the people whose floors you slept on. I don't know I would have done anything differently. It would have certainly affected my mindset a little bit, and would be useful information for a younger band to have. Like, hey, don't be an asshole to these people you're staying with, or the people, or your audience, for goodness sake. You want these to be your audience 20 years from now. We just celebrated the 25th anniversary of Pigface, and people came from all over the world for that show. And it had nothing to do with the music and everything to do with the music, but it was community and this shared sense of something or other. It was a beautiful thing. And I'm hoping to get some of this into words and down on paper so that a younger band coming up doesn't have to make all of the mistakes that we've all made in the past. I think everybody has to make their own mistakes, but maybe they could make a few less mistakes and a few smaller ones.
Martin, you've seen the music business change drastically over the years in many ways. I mentioned one earlier. Here's another one. You say albums may no longer be necessary, and I mean the full-length albums, but social media absolutely is, even for a startup. No, especially for a startup. How did you learn to adjust to a changing industry, Martin?
Well, the first change was punk. So you could say, I don't know, 15 or 16, I'm told as a professional 7 nights a week drummer, here's a chord, here's another, start a band. That practice, that musical ability is immaterial. So that was the first change. And then cassette tapes were the second. CDs were the third. Downloading, and then streaming, and then vinyl coming back. I mean, my goodness, the labels are down, but management companies are up, but most of them are really labeled anyway. And Spotify is different, except now that's a label. I mean, honestly, Heraclitus said the only constant thing is change. So that's another advantage of being older and having been around this for a while. It's all just going to keep changing. So the hysteria from the people going from their first situation through their first change. But for people who've been through 10 changes, the 11th change is just the 11th change.
Martin, you've traveled as far as China to scout and find good and interesting music. How does the music business differ, or how is it similar to what you experienced in the West?
So I went to China in 2007 to record a bunch of bands and try and, I think, rekindle that spark that I had down in London and in Chicago with industrial. And there was all kinds of wild experimentation, a kind of a naive love and an immersion in music that wasn't formulaic or strategic. It was really, really cool. The business itself was a catastrophe. Copyright doesn't exist really in China. They might say it does sometimes, but it doesn't really. I think I wanted to sign a band that was simultaneously signed to 3 other labels. It was just a mess. But the immersion in the music itself was just joyful. And I recorded a bunch of bands at a club which isn't around anymore. It's called D22. And I went into a studio with some producers and who engineered a bunch of stuff for me, recorded traditional instruments, scratch DJs, punk kids. I mean, it was pretty glorious. I made an album called China Dub Sound System, and made in China, and it was like making a Pigface album, really. A bunch of lunatics and anything can happen experimentation, just in Chinese.
China Dub Sound System. We're going to play a track from them in just a few moments as well.
It's kind of liberating and frightening to go to a country you've never been before, where you don't speak the language and you don't really understand what's going on, and then try and navigate that. It was kind of, it stripped away a lot of from me, and suddenly I'm just communicating with people with beats and arranging these songs, and we invited a traditional 3-piece string group to come in, Tibetan singers. I mean, it was just joyful and a really special time for me, really special time.
Martin, you're going to be in New York pretty soon for the premiere of the Public Image Limited documentary coming out.
Yeah, I went out to L.A., I think, a couple of years ago I think James Murphy from LCD Sound System was very interested in PAL. He's actually my first intern at my label when he was 15. And I think he's produced this documentary, and I went out to L.A. To do an interview for a few hours, and was happy to contribute, and so it's kind of an interesting time for PIL. So if PIL started in 78, it's almost 40 years old. Wow. Really? Is it?
Yes, it is. Oh my.
So it's kind of it's very weird to me that Pill is still around. You know, I saw John on morning TV last week, and Killing Joke is still making music, and as I said, Pigface is still around, and we might do a Brian Brain gig at some point in New York. It's really interesting that the stuff that you think is temporary, transient, actually sticks around, and it's a subject for much reflection for myself at the moment. I think I would have been more careful with my relationships with some of the people I was in bands with, had I known that 40 years later we'd still be connected on vinyl and disc and streaming, you know.
That's a good reason for the book, to warn some of the younger people getting in there to not make those mistakes, as you said before.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you again, Martin Atkins, for being with us. Once again, the book is called Welcome to the Music Business, You're F***ed, and it's available on Amazon and other digital book sales outlets. Martin, let's play a track from the China Dub sound system. This one was recorded back in 2008, Beijing Taxi, on Revenge of the 80s Radio.